Gabriel Gary. And for the rest, it will be led by Mr. Prihandana Adi, a partner at PHG Attorney at Law and Queen Mary University of London alumni. To begin this webinar, please
Oh,
welcome
ada
Mr.
varian. Oh,
Gabriel Gary as the first
ada varian. Oh, oi.
moderator. For Mr. Gabriel Gary, please give your speech and the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Aisha. Good afternoon, everyone who is in Jakarta, Indonesia, eastern part of the planet. Good morning to everyone who is more to the western side. I'm based in London. I would like to start by thanking the organizers for the invitation. I'm really thrilled to be here for various reasons, but in particular for the inauguration of this new alumni chapter in Indonesia. You know, CCLS, the Center for Commercial Law Studies, where I work for, has trained over 16,000 students over the last 40 years. And we like to think that we like to create a close relationship with our graduates. And we do plenty of efforts in this respect. And having a new chapter in Indonesia, it's a success. So I congratulate you on this step, and rest assured that CCLS will provide all the support needed to continue the links between Indonesian graduates and the Center for Commercial Law Studies. And if there's anyone who is there who has not already joined the chapter, or more generally, if you're not from Indonesia, joined CCLS alumni, let me remind you that there are many benefits of becoming an alumni. You will be part of a large network of professionals, like-minded professionals with contacts all over the world. You will be accessing events, newsletters. You will have a discount if you want to pursue further qualifications in Queen Mary. And if you for the 2 years following your graduation, you will have career support for free at Queen Mary. So we have trained professionals who will guide you in, designing your CV, providing you with contacts, etc. So there are a lot of benefits, and we are really keen in maintaining contacts with our alumni. So please stay in touch. Now, let me say a few words about the topic we are talking about. This seminar convenes us today, which is public-private partnerships. I am the convener of a module. It's called the Legal Aspects of Financing Development. This module aims to look at the role of the legal framework in developing countries in attracting sources of finance and maximizing their development impact. We ran this course for the last 20 years or so. I was not been teaching for so long. It was Professor Joe Norton, but it's a unique module. And I would like to say a few words on how this evolved and how this links to PPPs that we're going to talk about today. When we started, when the module started, there were two key messages that we wanted to convey to students. First was the need to approach financing development from a holistic approach. So looking at all sources of finance, domestic and international, public and private. Back then, this idea was novel because low-income countries, LDCs, were only looking at aid or official development assistance as the main source of financing development, and middle-income countries were looking at the private sources of finance. Public sector was seen as an obstacle to development. So, in fact, the topic back then was privatization. We're looking about what are the steps that developing countries needs to get rid of different aspects of involvement of the public sector in development, public utilities, telecommunications, etc., to gain efficiencies and, generate a pathway for successful development. That was the emphasis back then. Luckily, after two decades of experience, we have a much more nuanced approach to financing development. And we know that both public and private sector, domestic and foreign sources of finance, all of them have a key role to play in financing development. Now, the second message that we tried to convey from the outset back then was that for successful maximizing the benefits of financing development, it is essential to have a sound legal framework in place. The relationship between sound legal institutions, market functioning, and development impact is crucial. So from the outset, we were talking about concepts like good governance, the rule of law, sound legal institutions, and how all these relate for successful financing development. Back then, that idea was rather novel because the emphasis was on sound macroeconomic policies. You need to control inflation, you need to control your fiscal deficit, but the importance of legal institutions was rather overlooked. Again, now when we look at the Addis Ababa Action Agenda for Financing Development, there's an express recognition of the importance of having sound legal institutions in place to attract and sources of finance, channel them to maximize their development impact. Now, these two ideas of holistic approach to financing development and having sound legal institutions are linked very nicely with public-private partnerships. This is the textbook example of a holistic approach of financing development. On the one hand, we have the public sector, which has the responsibility to provide public infrastructure, public utilities, so on and so forth, but lacks sufficient capital, technical capacity to deliver that. And we have the private sector that can bring capital, can bring innovation in a joint partnership to deliver successful to fill in successfully this infrastructure gap. Now, that's one thing, holistic approach. And the other thing is public-private partnerships are, long contractual agreements, and they are complex, very complex, and we have a line of excellent hands-on experienced speakers to tease out the intricacies of the contractual engineering that supports public-private partnerships. But is this essential? Let me say this comment as a high-level comment. It is essential that these complex legal arrangements are embedded in a sound legal system. So we not only need good concessions law, procurement law, but also contract law and a good dispute settlement system as well. All this is part and parcel of the success of the PPPs. And also within the government, the need of having a sound functioning bureaucracy, technical capacity of people working at the government that will have to face very difficult decisions before embarking into a PPP project. So you have to question yourself, is the project justifiable from an economic, social, or development perspective? Is the project technically feasible? Is the project fiscally affordable? All these questions are not easy to answer, and only having in place the right public institutions with qualified personnel will be able to make the right decisions and decide whether or not going through this avenue that can be very positive, but it's also plagued with risks. And let me tell you, I'm from Uruguay, and in Latin America, public-private infrastructure was faced very difficult issues with respect to corruption. I mean, the public infrastructure financing ripped apart political systems in the last 10, 15 years. So again, the importance of having the rule of law in place to minimize this kind of risks. So again, these two key ideas were the only things I wanted to convey. A very important holistic approach of financing development. Public and private sector need to work together, but we need, the right institutional setting in place to minimize the risks of this pathway and maximize the development impact of this pathway. So those are my opening remarks, and I'm looking forward to hear from the hands-on experts on this. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Gabriel Gary. It is very encouraging and it makes us very curious to stay in this webinar. For the next speech, please welcome Mr. Arianto Wibowo, the Commissioner of the Association of Indonesian Public-Private Partnership Practitioners. For Mr. Arianto, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Ms. Moderator, Dita. Very good afternoon for Jakarta, ladies and gentlemen in Jakarta and regional area, and also very good morning to participants from London and regional area. Ladies and gentlemen and distinguished participants, I think to me it's been honored to be invited in this very important webinar. Yeah, and legal aspect is one of the most important expertise, I think, for Indonesia. So we, especially, you're right, Mr. Gary, that commercial law in Indonesia should be developed for or enhance the capacity of the even for the government employee and the private parties. Yeah. Allow me to introduce myself. That my name is Arianto Wibowo, and I'm a member of committee in Association of Public-Private Partnership National Experts, which are it's an organization that already have around 100 persons for the member, and the member came from many disciplines and also many regions, but mostly in 5 big countries in Indonesia, like Jakarta, Bandung, Surabaya, Medan, and Makassar. So PPP in Indonesia in practice is we start, unfortunately, after we hit by monetary crisis 98, but we start to learn. Then until 2005, we try to regulate, not regulate, but to relaxing the regulation that previously very tight for public sectors. Then right now, at that time, the regulation is was relaxing and give the opportunity to private to develop in public-private partnership projects in infrastructures. Yeah, in Indonesia right now, I think also almost the same with other countries. The PPP project right now is like blooming in the summer seasons. We have right now plenty of PPP projects. Yeah. Not only in the preparation stage, but also in the constructions or awarded to private in constructions, and also in already some of them are already in operation stage. Yeah. Ladies and gentlemen, PPP Indonesia is regulated by President Regulation number 38, 2015. So this one of the base regulation for development of PPP in Indonesia. And with that regulation, then the implementation regulation of presidential decree or presidential regulation followed by Ministry of Bapenas regulation, Ministry of Finance regulation, and also other ministries to be synchronized in development of PPP. Besides the legal, I think Indonesia also provide or establish one of the most important thing for PPP project financing, which is guarantee from a government. This guarantee government is proceed or processing by Indonesia Infrastructure Guarantee Fund, and even this state-owned enterprise can provide the guarantee by themselves for several projects. I mean, as far as their capacity to guarantee, they can guarantee themselves. But if the capacity is above their capacity of the guarantee, then this state-owned enterprise can ask Ministry of Finance to be co-guarantor for the PPP project, yeah. And the other facilities for Indonesia PPP project right now is government develop PT or enterprise, namely Sarana Multi Infrastructure, that can be funded small, not small, but partially of PPP financing project, but also they can provide services for project development facilities. Yeah, and furthermore, I think the government right now, not right now, but since 2010, if not mistaken, they provide like a viability gap fund, the fund from government that used to enhance the financial feasibility of a PPP project. Yeah, and to me, at least this last 10 years or 5 years, we can say, the acceleration of PPP in Indonesia is very good. And compared to last 10 years, I think right now PPP Indonesia is a bit different. Yes, we have learned a lot from other countries, especially from UK and Australia, and also another developed countries. We learn from UK, from IPA UK with 5 cases model. And we also follow the World Bank assistance to develop a PPP project, also Asian Development Bank. And we have also assistance from Australia, UK, and JICA, if not mistaken. Right now, then some projects under that assistance still ongoing. And but we realize that we still need to enhance our capacity, yeah, in some aspect, especially from legal, because to me, different with some other practice in our guru, if I can call it, in Indonesia, legal aspect is the first aspect that should be scrutinized before you work with PPP infrastructure projects. Yeah, and to my experience working with PPP, coordination is one of the key role for to make the project success. Yeah, and with this lesson, government of Indonesia, especially Bappenas, Ministry of Finance, and other 5 ministries and agency, developed like a forum for coordination. So every GCA that want to develop the PPP project can get you can call it like guidance and assistance from this forum of coordination, especially for coordinate the subject matters of a PPP, but and the rest they can still have get a support from a consultant also to prepare the documents and also the transactions advisor for selecting the public-private partnership enterprise. Yeah. Fortunately, this forum of coordination, we call it PPP Joint Office, and chaired by Mr. Sri Bagus Guritno. That's gentleman that will be one of your panelists, and you can also ask what is the PPP Joint Office to him. But to me, the discussion like this matters, this webinar is very important, and I hope that this discussion can very fruitful for everybody, and we can share our knowledge. But unfortunately, I have to leave within 30 minutes because I have to prepare another meeting. So I would like to thank you to you all, and thank you very much, and have a good webinar. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Arianto, for the preliminary insight. And for the last speech, please welcome Mr. Firdausi as the chairman of the CCLS Indonesia Chapter. For Mr. Firdausi, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much for the introduction, Ms. Aisha. Your Excellency, the Academic Director of the International Economic Law, LLM at QMUL, the Director of the Directorate of Innovative Development Financing, Bappenas, Commissioner of Association of Indonesian PPP Practitioners, partners at Hogan Lovells, Economic Affairs at UN, partners at DKMS, and partner at PhD. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. May the blessing from God be upon us. Eid ul Adha Mubarak for those who celebrate it, as we just celebrated 2 days ago. First of all, as the lead chapter of the CCLS Indonesia organization, together with Mr. Antonius, we would like to express our gratitude by saying thank you to all of the people who contribute to the success of this event. Where I would start from the distinguished guest speaker, like Mrs. Shahanum Kresnadi from UN, from UNCTAD to be precise. I believe it's still morning in Geneva, so I appreciate your presence today. I also thank Mr. Sri Bagus Guritno from Bappenas, Mr. Dongke from DKMS, Mr. Muhammad Kasmali, Mr. Alex Wong from Hogan Lovells, who kindly enough to allocate their time to share their knowledge, view, and experience with all of us in this event, despite the busy schedule the distinguished guest speaker has. I also would like to say thank you to Dr. Gabriel Gary from CCLS for allocating his time to contribute to the event, for 2 roles, to open the event and to become a moderator for the first session, despite it's still morning in London. So good morning to you in London. I also thank Prof. Yanis Kokoris from CCLS who approved this event. Yeah. I also thank, of course, Mrs. Catherine Taylor-Bennett and Mrs. Sarah Blakeway-Pillis from the CCLS Alumni and Development team for all hard work to assist us in the way you can. Importantly, I would like to thank you very much to my colleagues at CCLS Committee Indonesia Chapter, in particular, Mr. Dongke Ridwan Kafi as the brain of this event, Mr. Prihandana Adi for the e-flyer, and as a moderator for almost the whole session for this event will be. And any other helps, Miss Aisha Redita, as we know, already started her role as a host for this event. and also Mrs. Dia Paramita and my other colleagues at CCLS Indonesia Committee, such as Antonio Stigor, Aisyah Alamanda, and Albert Pratama for the promotion of the event. Because without teamwork, this event will stay just a plan. Last but not least, I also appreciate to all of the participants who kindly enough to allocate time to be here, as good event is determined not only by the topic, the speaker, and the organizer, but also by the presence of participants. As often people say, the more the merrier. Without further ado, I will end this shortly. Given the importance of this topic, I'm hoping this discussion will run smoothly and will be critical, so that it will be beneficial for all of us that present in this event. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. God bless us. I hope everybody enjoyed the event. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Firdausi, for your speech. Before we begin to the first session, I will explain the technical matters in this webinar. The participants can participate or ask questions through the chat box. And for the speakers, the committee will assist you in presenting the presentation, or you can also have the option to present it by yourself. For now, I will let Mr. Gabriel Gary to lead the first session. For Dr. Gary, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Asia. So it's a pleasure to start the first, introduce the first speaker, which is Isya Hanun Kresnadi, who is going to provide us an overview of investment flows, the role of PPPs as an important source of sustainable development to achieve the sustainable development goals. Isya is an economic affairs officer at the United Nations Conference on Trade and Development. She received her training in economics, Bachelor of Economics, majoring in monetary and industrial economics from the University of Indonesia. And she has a master's degrees from Columbia University's School of International and Public Affairs, where she focused on international economic policy. She is now working at the UNCTAD, United Nations Conference on Trade and Development, based in Geneva. Her work, experience, and research interests intersect between foreign direct investment, macroeconomics, and public policy in developing countries. I had the chance to see the slides of Isya in advance. It's a very interesting presentation that will help to lay the ground for more further technical discussions of aspects of the PPP. So please, Isya, you have the floor to speak for 20 minutes, and then we have 10 minutes question and answers. Isya, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Dr. Gary. Can everyone see my presentation okay? Yeah, okay. Good afternoon and good morning from Geneva. My name is Isha and I work at UNCTAD here in Geneva on the Division of Investment and Enterprise. And it's an honor and a great pleasure to join the distinguished panelists today. And of course, it's always a great pleasure to meet other fellow Indonesians. Now, today in my presentation, I would like to discuss sort of the global trends of investment. Now, I understand today is the topic you will deep dive into public-private partnership. Let me zoom out a little bit or a lot to see the work that we're doing here in Geneva, where we monitor the flows of all cross-border investments and try to share with you the findings from our latest work on from World Investment Report published this summer. Now, let me begin with circling back to what Dr. Gary has mentioned a little bit about the Addis Ababa Action Agenda. You've probably heard a lot about SDGs, and those of you following international development are aware that it's the inception and how it it's a continuation of Millennium Development Goals. What's important to this discussion is that basically countries agreed together to achieve these ambitious goals, but in Addis Ababa agenda, it also says something about credible means, which, going back to what Dr. Gary said, credible means can mean, does it make sense fiscally? Is it good? Does it make sense legally? Is it transparent? Does it pay attention to environmental, social, and governance goals? And the connection of Addis Ababa agenda with our work here in Geneva is on the financing side. One of our mandate is to help countries attract and channel investment to social development goals related sector. In 2014, our team examined how much financing do we actually need to achieve sustainable development goals, particularly in developing countries. We found a ballpark of 2.5 trillion a year. And I know it doesn't make sense to just say 2.5 trillion, but let me keep that number in mind, and maybe along the presentations, you'll get a sense of how big that is and how much more we needed. Now let me lay the grounds as well today on why I'm talking about FDI. Why does global investment matter? And in this context, I'll limit my scope to foreign direct investment. The reason is because it is one of the most, it is the most stable and sizable external flows compared to other sources of financing. As you can see in the graph, compared to remittance, portfolio investment, which includes debt and other investment, particularly for emerging countries, including Indonesia, it's stable and sizable, which as policymakers and business, it's a preferable characteristic, no? And then public-private partnership is included in this FDI inflows. Of course, as most of you experts in PPP know, that only part of PPP will be equity, mostly in debt, but within FDI inflows, we capture greenfield investments, brownfield, which in our terms is reinvested earnings, and we also start to monitor project finance, which typically are consortium types infrastructure deals, which involve cross-border investment, or which involve foreign investment. And also the last thing is the factors that move FDI generally moves also PPP, affect PPP. For example, investors' risk appetite, therefore interest rate. These are the things also important for PPP. So as PPP practitioners and experts, I'm sure these types of trends, well, I hope these type of trends could be useful for your work. Now, we looked at annual global trend of FDI, and one of the most interesting thing in this graph is, you see 2020, there's a drop of 35% of global investment inflows globally. However, it wasn't actually the first time it went down. It actually have started fumbling in 2016. And we think that this is because there are big global trends that has been affecting global investment flows. And the pandemic just came on top of it and sort of suppress it even further. These trends that I'm talking about include industrial revolution, industry 4.0, sorry, a lot of automation that makes competitive labor cost, which used to be a great investment pool, now becomes sort of obsolete. There's also a tendency towards protectionism and more of a focus towards regionalization than global, sort of global presence if you're a company or a business or investor. And there's also a lot of sustainable development goals imperative. For example, given the commitment to climate change mitigation, many big investors have moved away from oil since even before 2016, and that has shaped global investment flows today. Now, these three indicators are what we use to explain why FDI flows fell quite a lot. 35% is more than the decline in trade and the decline in global growth. Now we see, let's start in the middle. Cross-border M&As are basically equity flows. It's not too bad, minus 30%. But this is also because we saw a lot of multinational companies restructuring their presence, consolidating their presence, and so the transaction sort of buffers it up. Now, for PPP, I think greenfield and international project finance are very interesting, and it gives an indication of sort of a forward-looking as well. Usually, because greenfield projects are announced projects, it usually is a good indicator for future investment flows. So is international project finance, and international project finance are actually they're more in infrastructure and utilities. So that is where a lot of PPPs are. So these two are still falling. Greenfield dropped by a third, and of course this is related to successive waves of lockdown, like in India, Indonesia, in that region. Let me also insert here, I hope everyone in Jakarta and your loved ones are healthy and well. So from these indicators, we think that global investment flows could still be suppressed this year and will only rebound at the best scenario in 2022. So let me skip this trend. This is just a global trend of how regions perform differently in terms of FDI inflows. And let me focus on this slide here, because as I mentioned, we work hard to channel to help countries channel investments in SDGs. Now, how do we do that? To affect something, of course, you need to keep track of it. So we start compiling data on SDG related investments. Now, the pandemic is looking to, unfortunately, undo a lot of progress made in SDGs. As you can see in the graph, all sectors experienced a decline, and it's pretty heavy. However, only renewable energy declined in value. However, in numbers, it actually increased. So that is one good news about this. And also, especially compared to traditional oil and gas, renewable energy has overtaken, its growth has overtaken oil and gas globally. Now, what this means is, again, as well, you remember that 2.5 trillion as the pre-pandemic needs. Given this decline, it means there will be a bigger need to sort of cover this lost ground in the medium term. The next slide shows you our projection. As I mentioned, it looks like it's still going to be suppressed, especially with successive waves and physical restrictions, which is very important to first save lives. And the next slide is specific on Indonesia. Now, how is Indonesia doing after the pandemic? It is FDI flows to Indonesia actually declined, but pretty much in a not it's mostly in line with Southeast Asia. So and it's less decline than global decline. So that could be a good sign. And the reason was there's a big drop in investment in manufacturing. Announced greenfield as well. Actually, it is recording a positive, which could signal a recovery. And international project finance, though declining in value, actually there are actually more projects in 2020 than 2019, and these projects are in manufacturing and oil refinery related. Now, another thing I want to mention briefly is investment policy developments. It's we also keep track of how our countries, what are their attitude towards investment policy? Is it more liberalization or restriction? And we found that the pandemic actually, during the pandemic, we saw more restrictive regulation in investment. And I'm very interested to hear from the next speakers whether how PPP laws have they changed or not during the pandemic. Now, the next part, we'll talk about investment in recovery. We think that investment in recovery needs to be impactful, focus on sectors that can help countries fulfill their structural transformation, increase human capital. And so these are estimates of how effective an investment in these sectors are. I would not go through this today, but I would have to give you a link on this. And this part is also very interesting, and this would relate to a lot of infrastructure projects globally. So we looked at how countries are responding to the pandemic, and of course there are big stimulus programs deployed in developed countries and developing countries, and we try to break it down into what part of it are still focusing on health sector and income support, rescuing lives, and what part can maintain existing business, and what part can help generate investment. As you can see, the gap in developing countries due to fiscal space limitations, it's almost 1/10 of what developed countries are deploying. But most importantly as well, with this new need, on top of perhaps on top of the 2.5 trillion, multilateral development banks by Q1 this year is committing 228 billion, and so that is such a fraction of the baseline pre-pandemic needs, and this new need, this big fiscal stimulus programs, and most of the programs are in infrastructure, some renewables, a lot of sort of digital and green focus in developed countries, and this would also need financing. So what is the connection with PPP? In this, there's a lot of old New Deal in this fiscal stimulus, and the financing needs are huge. And I think, you know, PPP has been an important part of development and will increasingly be very important, also given the more limited supply of financing and the increased needs. And so I think Indonesia has a lot in the pipeline, and is visibly, continuously doing reforms. And I'm very glad that we have experts, legal experts, actually on the ground and doing that important work. And what does the UN think about? You know, so we have this big needs for SDG, not just for SDG attainment, but then for recovery after the pandemic. What are some of the principles that we think are important to both achieve the SDG sustainably? These are some of the things that we work on. There's a policy framework that we developed called IPFSD, an action plan for SDG. I could talk more about that or give you the link for that. So with that, I end my presentation and excited to hear more from the crowd.
Thank you, Isha. Thank you very much for your presentation. This is very timely, very useful for the discussion that will follow. You have provided us with a very detailed information about investment flows, trends in the last year, but putting the discussion, it's very helpful to put our discussions of PPPs in the broader perspective. So basically, when we engage in discussing the technicalities, legal technicalities surrounding PPPs, we need to know how much money is available for this purpose, where does it come from, where is it going to? And there we can, you know, ground the discussion in that respect. I would like, personally, I would like to commend the work of UNCTAD in keeping track of investment flows, because when we talk about sustainable development and we list all these goals, etc., we are at risk of ending in a very high level, undetailed, aspirational sort of language. But we need data, we need a specific information on investment flows. Where is investment going? What type of investment? How is increasing, reducing? And on investment policies, what is the attitude of countries towards foreign investment? Are they restricting? Is national security increasing? Protectionism? Who is doing what? So all this information, again, helps to ground the debate and make it much more precise to take the right steps to indeed try to achieve these sustainable development goals. So thank you very much for UNCTAD's work in that respect. So now we have 10 minutes for questions and answers. So I open the floor. If there's anyone who has a question for Isha, please type it in the chat. Any questions? So maybe while we allow the audience to get, break the ice, so to speak, I'm sure some people might want to chip in. I have a very specific, I have many questions, but I don't want to monopolize this. Is very
Go ahead.
But I have one specific one that struck me from your presentation.
Yeah.
And it's, the general trend has been a decrease of 33% on investment flows, and then you discriminated that by sector. and you mentioned a decrease of 54% investment in health. Now that it's difficult for me to understand, and I ask you to shed some light here, because from a non-expert perspective, I see many countries committing public finance on health as a response to the crisis. If there's something that states have done, is to put money in hospitals, in PPP equipment, PPE equipment, sorry, and all sort of things. So how can these two be reconciled, if you wish? A lot of public spending on public health and such a stark decline on investment in the health sector.
Yeah, thank you for the question. So a lot of the investment in health within the fiscal stimulus, I think it's more from it's on budget. So from a global investment perspective, it's not captured there. However, we saw a lot of different types of investment in health globally. So we're starting to see more of, instead of acquisitions, we start to see more cooperations, like joint research for the, I think it's the Pfizer cooperation. That's sort of, it's a cross-border cooperations instead of acquisitions. Health investments, whether as a response to this pandemic, we don't see a big cross-border investments, but we see more local and on budget, so on government budget. So that is not captured in FDI, which is in essence cross-border.
Thank you. Yeah, no, that's absolutely clear. Yes. Thank you, Chef, for that. Now we have one question in the chat. Can we have an example of PPP in education done so far in Indonesia? So maybe this is, I don't know if you want to say a few words about this, or we let it the experts in Indonesia to speak later.
Yeah.
But perhaps give us, a short overview about is it foreign direct investment relevant in education? Is that something that relevant in the context of the overall FDI flows?
Right. I mean, I think it is in a lot of in many sectors, but I guess it depends on the characteristics of the host economy. No, I don't see why. I don't see what sector it wouldn't be relevant in. For example, as long as it's a good extra source of financing. For example, I think the other day I heard insurance for coral reefs as PPP. I mean, I feel like this type of new structures of PPP, it could work in many contexts. So, of course, in education, I guess.
We have a couple more questions here. Let me find this question from one. Maybe this is interesting for
exactly.
In terms of, we're talking about what makes a country attractive for foreign direct investment. And what deters investment flows. And you were mentioning that there were some pull factors that were important in the past that now have been weakened. So having access to cheap labor costs, or that's not necessarily as strong as it was in the past because of automatization. Maybe renewable energy has been moving investment away from fossil fuels, etc. But there's a question here, focusing this question in Indonesia. Maybe you from Indonesia might shed some light on this. How do you see Indonesia in the context of foreign direct investment? Is Indonesia still a lucrative FDI haven?
Oh, wow. Well, in essence, the pull factors of FDI are competitive factor costs. So that includes competitive labor cost, high productivity, and a big market size. There's these theoretical pull and push factors of investment. And Indonesia, of course, as an open economy, is affected by these factors matter, basically. I think if you compare it with other Southeast Asian economies, let's say Vietnam and Thailand, Indonesia has big, market size isn't comparable. However, in doing business, still Vietnam and Thailand are currently above Indonesia. So that's just one of the issues. So people ask us about, with this China-US tension, will factories move to Indonesia? From abroad, it doesn't look like so, but if fellows in Indonesia have examples, I would love to hear, or have knowledge of whether that's happening, or to hear. So I think there's a big opportunity there if Indonesia can step up in competitiveness, and thinking already to go beyond competitive labor costs. So human capital, reskilling to IT skills, these type of things, and not just rely on market size, which I think will continue to bring investments to Indonesia. Not just rely on these factors, but to really step up their competitive game in this new sort of Industry 4.0 era.
Yeah, thank you, Isha. And we have plenty of questions, but we have not much time left, so one more if you don't mind. And this, I will merge some of these questions because they relate to the same topic, and it's how to ensure foreign direct investment in general, but PPPs in particular, is channeled to those sectors that have maximum development impact. One of the panelists talks about social infrastructure, healthcare facilities. Another one is talking about the need to ensure the transfer of technology impact. Now, we say a lot, yeah, it's important to channel investment from those who are, but at the end of the day, the investor is driven by profit maximization criteria. So what are the steps, or what could a country like Indonesia do to attract FDI and investment in PPPs in those sectors that have the maximum development impact? What would be your general thoughts on that?
Right. I don't have Indonesian specific knowledge on this, but we have looked at, for developing countries and least developed countries, what would give the most bang for the buck, basically, in development. And for some economies, it's agriculture, and a different stage industrial, and a different stage digital. But mostly, if I remember correctly, it's around those digital industries, agriculture for least developed countries, and also infrastructure. Now, once you understand what gives most bang for the buck, of course investors will be profit oriented. But it's not to say that sort of the general attitude today towards ESG factors are very good compared to 10 years ago. Now every company has this CSR accountability report on ESG, so that is already a good sign. What governments can do is what we think government can do is to tailor investment incentives or promotions that that pays more attention to these sectors. So, for example, the manufacturing industry. It has a power to, it has the potential to help a country transform, not just infrastructure or utilities, but, industries, rejuvenating industries, capital expenditures, technology. So yeah, countries would do well, knowing which sectors can give most bang for the buck, and then as use the policy tools like investment promotion and incentivize these sectors.
Thank you, Isha. Thank you very much. I'm afraid we have many more questions, so definitely your presentation has sparked a lot of interest among our audience, but we have to be strict with time because we have other speakers as well, and we reached our time allocation for this session. So perhaps the organizers may send the questions of you if you have access to the chat, and maybe discuss afterwards if there is time. So thank you very much for your presentation.
Thank you so much, Dr. Gary.
And thank you, the organizers, again for inviting me. As I said, I have to leave for another conference now, but I wish you all the best. Special regards to my former student, Donkey. It was a pleasure to having you at Queen Mary, and all of you, of course. And I look forward to meeting you in person or online in the near future. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Gabriel Gary, for your assistance as the moderator. And I will let Mr. Prihandana Adi to assist for moderating the next sessions.
All right. Thank you, Isa. Thank you, Dr. Gary. Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. Thank you for the organizer having me lead this session. As informed earlier, this session will start by the presentation from Bapak Sri Bagus. Selamat sore, Pak.
Selamat sore, Pak.
Yeah. Thank you for coming, Pak. In this occasion, before the presentation begins, please allow me to introduce the speaker, Bapak Sri Bagus Guritno. He is the director of the Directorate of Creative Financing for Development, National Planning Board Indonesia, or Bappenas. He obtained a bachelor degree in accounting from Brawijaya University and Master of Science in Public Policy from University of Alabama, Illinois, USA. Pak Bagus has assisted numerous Ppp projects in Indonesia, including a number of important policies governing Ppp at national level, and planning numerous Ppp projects, such as assisting numerous studies of the project, including preliminary studies, outline business cases, and financial business cases. In this occasion, he will present on the general view of the Ppp in Indonesia. And in the presentation, he will also discuss the challenge in the view of government, which has the responsibility to roll out of the project, including to invite the private parties to join the project. So please, Pak Bagus, the floor is yours to start the presentation. Thank you very much.
Baik, terima kasih Pak Pri. Jadi terima kasih pada panitia yang mengundang kami untuk memberikan penjelasan terkait dengan general point terkait dengan implementasi Ppp, atau di Indonesia kita sebut dengan istilah KPPU. Mungkin saya izin share screen ya.
Udah bisa langsung, Pak?
Ya. Oke. Ini mungkin sekedar background terkait dengan arah pembangunan kita selama 5 tahun ke depan. Jadi bagaimana terkait dengan SDG School, kemudian terkait dengan infrastructure development highlight, yaitu ada untuk sustainable drinking water, kemudian untuk sanitasi, kemudian untuk ini water resources management, kemudian untuk connectivity gas atau kita sebut gas, electrification ratio, kemudian terkait dengan power plant. Ya, kemudian di sini ada juga 9 untuk connectivity, mulai dari national road connectivity, kemudian toll road connectivity, railway connectivity, air transport, sea, dan satelit. Nah, kemudian kalau tadi terkait dengan strategi infrastruktur yang dibangun, kemudian kita juga mempunyai strategi untuk pembiayaannya. Jadi mulai kita menggunakan private, kemudian kita bekerja sama, PPP, atau penugasan BUMN, dan yang terakhir baru kita menggunakan state budget atau ini anggaran dari Pemda. Jadi ini strategi yang kita gunakan, porsinya kita arahkan supaya dari dana public money itu bisa di leverage untuk mendorong tersedianya infrastruktur yang lebih besar. Kemudian di sini terkait dengan komposisi, kalau kita lihat 5 tahun yang lalu dan 5 tahun ke depan, di sini sudah mulai ada pergeseran. Jadi kalau 5 tahun yang lalu, periode 2015 sampai 2019, di sini porsi dari pemerintah dibanding private itu masih lebih besar dilakukan pemerintah, tapi 5 tahun ke depan sampai 2024 porsinya berbalik. Ini apa yang bisa kita baca di sini adalah pola-pola yang menggunakan PPP atau kerjasama pemerintah dengan badan usaha di Indonesia sudah diterima oleh market. Jadi risk appetite itu sudah diterima oleh investor. Kalau investor kita bagi 2, yaitu konsorsium dan lembaga pembiayaan. Jadi mereka sudah menerima risk alokasi di dalam proyek-proyek KPBU. Nah, ini yang kita optimis ke depan bahwa pembangunan infrastruktur itu bisa dilakukan dengan cara kerjasama antara pemerintah dengan badan usaha. Atau kalau di luar negeri kita sebut dengan PPP. Nah, kemudian ini definisi yang kita pakai di Indonesia. Jadi harus ada kerjasama antara pemerintah dengan badan usaha, dan yang dikerjasamakan adalah untuk penyediaan infrastruktur untuk kepentingan publik. Nah, kemudian di sini ada support dari pemerintah yang diberikan untuk membuat proyeknya menjadi layak. Jadi semua proyek KPBU yang ditawarkan itu sudah distrukturkan sehingga proyek tersebut layak secara finansial dan ekonomi. Ya. Sehingga di sini partner atau badan usaha yang akan bekerjasama dengan pemerintah akan memperoleh keuntungan yang wajar, margin yang wajar di sini. Jadi ada dukungan pemerintah yang bisa dimasukkan untuk menutupi gap apabila dari proyek tersebut tidak layak secara finansial. Dan kemudian ada alokasi risiko. Nah, ini penting untuk dipahami bahwa kalau kita ngomong terkait dengan KPPU, Ppp, yaitu alokasi risiko. Kalau pemerintah menstrukturkan suatu proyek KPPU atau kerjasama dengan risk alokasinya itu tidak imbang, tidak wajar, ya nanti pasar akan merespon secara negatif dan ya tidak ada yang mau bekerja sama. Nah, di sini pentingnya kita memahami risk alokasi tersebut. Kemudian ini benefit yang diperoleh oleh pemerintah dan masyarakat. Jadi untuk mengurangi ketergantungan dari national budget atau state budget. Kemudian di sini terkait dengan apa? Kualitas dari ini infrastrukturnya juga bisa lebih baik. Kemudian di sini juga memberikan opportunity untuk pemegang dana, pemilik dana untuk tempat menginvestasikan fund-nya. Dan ini proyek-proyek pemerintah yang menggunakan PPP atau KPPU itu proyek yang memang aman di sini. Kemudian terkait dengan regulasi, ini mungkin sangat terkait dengan yang dibahas pada siang hari ini terkait dengan regulasinya KPPU di Indonesia. Dan ini sudah cukup lengkap. Jadi, tapi yang perlu diingat adalah dasarnya adalah Perpres 38. Jadi rezimnya itu berbeda dengan rezim pengadaan barang dan jasa. Jadi rezimnya adalah pengadaan badan usaha. Nah, ini di LKPP sudah ada turunannya sendiri untuk yang mengatur terkait dengan pelaksanaan pengadaan badan usaha tersebut. Di sini ada peraturan LKPP nomor 19 dan 2009. Terkait dengan ketentuan umum, di sini Bappenas juga sudah mengeluarkan 2 peraturan. Kemudian terkait dengan garansi, jadi proyek itu untuk membuat proyeknya menjadi bankable, juga sudah ada peraturannya terkait dengan garansi. Kemudian availability payment juga ada, sudah ada. Jadi kalau proyek-proyek sosial yang menggunakan skema availability payment, kalau pusat, proyek-proyek pusat menggunakan rujukannya peraturan Menteri Keuangan, dan kalau untuk di proyek daerah menggunakan rujukannya peraturan Menteri Dalam Negeri. Kemudian untuk membuat proyeknya menjadi layak, di sini juga sudah ada terkait dengan VGF atau Viability Gap Fund untuk membuat proyeknya menjadi layak. Dan yang terakhir di sini juga disediakan untuk Project Development Fund untuk membantu PJPK atau Contracting Agent yang mau mempersiapkan proyek-proyek KPPU. Nah, kemudian terkait ini cukup penting pada hal ini untuk membedakan PPP yang kita jalani di Indonesia. Jadi yang pertama di sini kita menggunakan civil law system. Jadi nanti ini merupakan perikatan perdata antara pemerintah dengan badan usaha. Kemudian di sini terkait dengan regulasinya atau kontrak yang dibuat, di sini menggunakan ini artikel 1338 Indonesia Civil Code stipulates. Di sini yang mengatur terkait dengan perikatan Ya. Kemudian yang berikutnya terkait dengan ini kerjasama. Nah, ini di sini juga perlu jadi perhatian bersama bahwa untuk kerjasama itu bisa menggunakan KPBU, dasarnya adalah penyediaan infrastruktur untuk pelayanan publik, atau bisa juga menggunakan basisnya pemanfaatan BMN. Nah, di sini menggunakan Perpres 27. Atau bisa juga menggunakan ini, limited scheme concession. Nah, ini bentuk-bentuk kerjasama yang bisa digunakan selain dari Perpres 38. Kemudian yang terakhir, yang berbeda penanganan atau proses PPP di Indonesia dengan negara lain adalah di Indonesia itu tidak ada PPP unit. Ya. Jadi yang ada di setiap kementerian yang diberi tugas terkait dengan supportnya untuk proyek-proyek KPBU. Dan itu dikumpulkan di dalam kantor bersama. Ini mungkin ada ini simbolnya di background saya di sini, kantor bersama. Di sini ada 8 institusi, mulai dari Menko Marinvest, Kementerian Perekonomian, Kementerian Dalam Negeri, Kementerian Keuangan, Bappenas, Kementerian Investasi atau PKPM, LKPP, dan PTPII. Nah, PTPII di sini dia berfungsi sebagai BUPI atau Badan Usaha Penjaminan Infrastruktur. Jadi semua proyek KPBU itu bisa atau eligible untuk mengajukan penjaminan dari pemerintah. Nah, itu membuat proyeknya menjadi bankable. Jadi ini tadi juga related dengan ada tadi yang satu pertanyaan terkait dengan ability payment. Kalau situasinya seperti pandemi seperti ini, pembayarannya nanti bagaimana? Kalau ada kemampuan fiskal yang menurun. Nah, ini fungsi dari penjaminan. Jadi penjaminan tersebut akan berfungsi menjamin semua hal yang dijanjikan oleh pemerintah yang dituangkan di dalam perjanjian kerjasama PPP tersebut itu dijamin oleh pemerintah melalui PTPII. Dan penjaminannya nanti kompensasinya berupa finansial. Ya, jadi kalau suatu saat fiskalnya pemerintah itu tidak cukup, fiskal dari PJBK tidak cukup untuk membayar ability payment, nah ini akan ditutupi gap-nya dari PTPII. Nah, sehingga dari sisi ini, lender melihat proyeknya menjadi bankable karena apabila risiko dari PJBK itu tidak bisa membayar dengan cukup karena fiskalnya turun, ada mekanisme penjaminan di sana. Kemudian PPP unit di sini, jadi proyek yang mau dikerjakan secara PPP itu tetap ada di contracting agency. Jadi proyek itu tidak diambil alih oleh kantor bersama, tapi tetap ada di sana, di GCE-nya atau PJBK-nya kita sebut. Kantor bersama yang terdiri dari 8 tadi, itu memberikan supportnya, supaya proyeknya itu bisa berjalan sesuai dengan proses. Ini berbeda dengan negara lain. Kalau negara lain ada PPP unit, kemudian proyeknya ini diambil alih oleh PPP unit tersebut, kemudian nanti distrukturkan, ditenderkan, ketemu pemenang, baru dikembalikan ke PJBK-nya untuk mereka berkontrak. Nah, kemudian ini prosesnya. Kalau prosesnya Di sini ada 4 besaran proses, mulai dari perencanaan. Ini untuk yang solicited. Mungkin sudah tahu semua ini terkait dengan ini bedanya solicited dan unsolicited. Jadi solicited ini yang dilakukan oleh contracting agency atau PJPK. Jadi fasenya mulai dari planning, kemudian penyiapan, kemudian transaksi, dan ini pelaksanaan kontrak. Kemudian di sini kita ada mekanisme Ppp Book. Jadi Ppp Book ini merupakan sarana komunikasi antara pemerintah dengan market. Bahwa pemerintah ini mempunyai perencanaan untuk membuat proyek itu dikerjasamakan dengan pihak private atau badan usaha. Semua proyek itu di tahapan transaksi ini harus dilakukan dengan tender terbuka. Jadi kalau itu tidak dilakukan dengan tender terbuka, ya support dari pemerintah tidak akan diberikan di sana. Ya. Harus terbuka, fair, adil, itu yang menjadi istilahnya dari backbone-nya suatu proses proyek KPBU. Ya. Sehingga dari perencanaan dimasukkan di dalam Ppp Book. Ini proyek yang sedang dipersiapkan, dibuatkan prastudi kelayakannya. Kemudian nanti setelah selesai akan diubah statusnya menjadi ready to offer. Ya, di sini di dalam penyiapannya itu dilakukan market sounding. Di market sounding itu untuk mengkonfirmasi bahwa konsep struktur kerjasama tersebut akan sesuai dengan risk appetite dari market. Kita melihat responnya. Kalau dari market tidak merespon, jadi tolok ukur kita adalah apabila tidak ada yang memberikan letter of intent untuk ikut di dalam transaksi selanjutnya, minimal 3 konsorsium, ya berarti strukturnya masih belum sepenuhnya diterima oleh market. Ya, itu yang kita lakukan. Ini prosesnya. Kemudian di sini untuk yang unsolicited, jadi unsolicited itu yang ide atau prakarsa dari badan usaha. Jadi pilihannya bisa 2, melalui proses menyampaikan prastudi kelayakan terlebih dahulu, atau langsung menyampaikan FS-nya. Kemudian setelah itu akan dilakukan penilaian, dan di sini tetap harus dilakukan tender. Nah, pramakarsa akan diberikan 3 pilihan, yaitu tambahan nilai 10%, right to match, atau proyek tersebut FS-nya dibeli oleh GCA. Jadi tetap harus melalui proses pelelangan. Proses pelelangan ini penting, yaitu untuk mengukur kewajaran dari usulan pramakarsa tadi. Kalau itu tidak dilakukan pelelangan, ya kita nggak tahu tawaran tersebut wajar atau tidak. Dan kalau dilakukan di bypass tanpa pelelangan, ya berarti GCA harus tanggung jawab sendiri nanti. Kemudian di sini ini yang terakhir terkait dengan challenge yang di KPBU di Indonesia terkait dengan pemahaman. Jadi knowledge sharing, dissemination, kemudian terkait dengan regulasi yang simple. Jadi kita sudah melakukan hal tersebut. dan juga terkait dengan proses percepatannya. Sehingga kami di kantor bersama ini juga sudah membuat SOP terkait untuk menyamakan terkait dengan kesamaan proses, kesamaan dokumen, dan kesamaan untuk melakukan monitoring untuk MONEF. Sehingga kepastian dari proses suatu proyek KPBU itu menjadi lebih terukur. Baik, mungkin yang terakhir tadi yang seperti kami sampaikan, Ppp unit itu kalau di Indonesia tidak ada, yang ada hanya kantor bersama atau joint office. Nah, joint office ini terdiri dari 8 institusi yang semuanya ini melakukan koordinasi untuk membuat prosesnya ini menjadi bisa berjalan untuk N-nya bisa sinkron. Jadi fungsinya untuk akselerasi, kemudian kita lakukan koordinasi, fasilitasi, dan capacity building kepada baik itu kepada GCA, kemudian kepada calon investor maupun ke lembaga pembiayaan, lembaga-lembaga yang akan membiayai project finance tersebut. Mungkin itu penjelasan kami terkait dengan implementasi KPBU di Indonesia. Itu terima kasih, kami kembalikan ke Pak Pri.
Selamat terima kasih banyak Pak Bagus. Presentasinya sangat menarik Pak. Di sini kita ada waktu sekitar 10 menit untuk sesi tanya jawab. Kita ada beberapa pertanyaan Pak, cuman nanti saya gabung jadi satu pertanyaan sehingga bisa langsung dijawab oleh Pak Bagus. Nah, kalau dilihat dari sisi peraturan Pak, viability gap fund itu hanya bisa disediakan untuk proyek-proyek yang secara finansial tidak atraktif. Dan bicara solusi lainnya, mungkin apakah pertanyaannya ada solusi lain selain kita provide FGF tadi? Itu pertama. Terus yang kedua Pak, ini menarik sih Pak, dari experience yang terjadi di lapangan, terutama dalam situasi pandemik seperti ini yang terjadi secara global, ada beberapa proyek yang mungkin dari sisi investor atau private party sebelumnya masuk dalam skala priority. Artinya investor-investor yang mungkin dari state owned dari negara tetangga bisa masuk ke kita, invest di Indonesia karena memang sebelumnya dianggap sebagai sektor yang prioritas untuk dilakukan investasi di Indonesia. Begitupun dari sisi Indonesia menganggap bahwa itu sektor yang sifatnya perlu dipercepat pembangunan infrastrukturnya. Nah, namun yang terjadi adalah dengan kondisi pandemi Pak ya, tadi juga dengan hubungannya government support, itu ada beberapa tendensi yang saya lihat itu proyek itu tidak menjadi priority dari si investor akhirnya gitu, karena memang terjadi pandemi COVID dan secara finansial akhirnya proyek menjadi tidak visible. Nah, terkait itu Pak, tentu dari sisi pemerintah kita tetap ingin memboosting pembangunan infrastruktur dengan moto atau misi yang tetap quote-unquote kita provide equal benefit for our government, society, dan including the investor dalam konteks PPP ini. Nah, dari ketiga isu tadi Pak, sebenarnya itu kan bisa kita katakan sebagai suatu challenge, tapi mau nggak mau harus kita cari way out-nya dalam konteks percepatan pembangunan infrastruktur dan dibungkus dengan konsep kerjasama PPP ini Pak. Nah, terkait hal itu mungkin dari sudut pandang Bapak untuk mengatasi challenge itu, apa yang sebenarnya harus dilakukan oleh pemerintah dalam konteks secara general Pak?
Baik, Pak Pri, mungkin saya jawab satu-satu ya.
Ya.
Yang pertanyaan pertama tadi terkait dengan PGF ya. PGF
betul,
itu kenapa kok diberikan terakhir? Ya. Dan VGF itu juga menjadi persyaratannya itu dia menjadi satu-satunya apa namanya kalau di ini bidding parameter. Jadi untuk proyek KPBU yang mendapatkan VGF dari Kementerian Keuangan, VGF harus dijadikan bidding parameter. Ya. Mungkin Pak Pri atau teman-teman di sini bisa melihat ada satu proyek yang Kementerian Keuangan, pemerintah sudah komit memberikan ini VGF-nya, tapi pada saat dilakukan pelelangan, ternyata ada yang ngebid itu VGF-nya 0. Ya. Jadi ini sebagai pengetahuan bersama. Nah, kemudian kenapa pada saat menstrukturkan kok diberikan VGF? Jadi VGF itu last resort. Nah, kenapa? Karena VGF itu sumbernya dari rekening BUN dari Kementerian Keuangan. Kalau melihat kewajiban dari penyediaan infrastruktur, kita perlu melihat itu adanya di mana. Kan tugas di pemerintahan ini sudah dibagi-bagi. Ada Pemda, ada KL. Ya. Jadi mereka lah yang harus pertama menyediakan supportnya terlebih dahulu. Kalau proyeknya itu tidak layak. Nah, tidak layak itu gimana caranya ngitung? Nah, caranya ngitung adalah kita ngitung project cost, kemudian dibandingkan dengan revenue stream. Revenue stream ngitungnya dari mana? Menghitungnya adalah dari ini, ability to pay dan willingness to pay-nya. Sehingga nanti dibandingkan dengan projection revenue stream dengan cost project. Kalau itu tidak tertutup, maka pertama yang harus menutupi gap-nya adalah instansi yang memang tugasnya di situ melalui kapasitas fiskalnya dia. Kalau di situ sudah diberikan dan masih ada kekurangan, nah baru dari Kementerian Keuangan menyediakan VGF-nya. Nah, tapi kemudian untuk melihat apakah memang benar segitu, ini Pak Prilang.
Ya Pak, mungkin bisa dilanjutkan.
Ada Pak.
Ya. Enggak, soalnya terus gambarnya hilang tadi. Ya. Jadi jadi kalau mau menanyakan tentang VGF, ya ini itu sebagai last resort. Jadi untuk membuat proyek yang KPBU menggunakan ini tarif itu menjadi layak. Nah, sehingga desain ini nanti akan dilihat oleh badan usahanya yang mau ikut tender tadi. Apakah kalau dia menginvestasikan sejumlah ini uangnya di sana akan kembali atau tidak dengan revenue stream-nya? Gitu. Cukup menjawab nggak Pak Pri?
Ya, menjawab Pak, menjawab. Jadi memang regulatory-nya cukup ini Pak ya, restriktif dan memang reserve untuk hal-hal yang sifatnya spesifik ya.
Nah, Kemudian gini, ini juga sering ditanyakan, kenapa kok VGF hanya untuk yang menggunakan tarif, yang ability payment kenapa tidak? Nah, ini kan kalau kita melihat keuangan negara, itu kan satu kantong. Jadi untuk proyek yang ability payment yang memang itu milik atau project owner-nya adalah KL pusat, ya itu harus dipilih antara menggunakan ability payment atau menggunakan ini ada dukungan dari pemerintah dengan bentuk VGF tadi. Jadi yang VGF itu memang tidak bisa digabung dengan yang ability payment yang proyeknya adalah dari KL. Gitu. Baik, mungkin yang pertanyaan berikutnya tadi gimana, Pak Pri?
Terkait ini, Pak, priority project yang sebelumnya mungkin jadi priority dan kita optimis untuk di boosting pada saat sebelum COVID, baik dari sisi government mungkin dari sisi investor juga. Now sekarang posisinya ada pandemic sehingga ada beberapa project yang mungkin akan diinitiate menjadi quote unquote menjadi project yang blacklist di sisi investor. Nah itu effort yang bisa kita lakukan untuk make this project equal dan atraktif lagi itu seperti apa Pak kira-kira Pak?
Nah ini mungkin saya beri contoh terkait dengan airport. Kalau dulu sebelum pandemik itu kan airport itu banyak melayani untuk orang, untuk penumpang. Ya. Tapi kalau sekarang kita tetap memperhitungkan bahwa airport itu revenue stream-nya banyak atau bertumpu pada penumpang, ya hitung-hitungannya nggak masuk. Nah, sehingga kita perlu merearrange lagi. Setelah pandemik ini kecenderungannya atau perilaku masyarakat ini bagaimana? Nah, perilakunya kalau saya perhatikan di sini mereka lebih mengurangi traveling dan mereka lebih menggunakan waktunya di rumah dan kalau melakukan purchasing itu menggunakan ini online. Ya, sehingga ini layanan di airport itu pengiriman parcel itu pasti naik. Nah, di sini makanya perlu dilakukan rearrangement lagi. Dan itu memang dibutuhkan suatu keahlian dari konsultan-konsultan yang bisa melihat ini potensi seperti inilah. Kita di pemerintah ya ini pasti harus melakukan penyesuaian dengan melakukan adapting dengan kondisi yang saat ini. Sehingga nanti kalau itu ditawarkan kepada badan usaha, ya mereka tetap melihat proyeknya menjadi visible. Jadi ya kita harus ini adaptif. Kuncinya di situ.
Oke, terima kasih Pak atas responnya. Ini kita ada beberapa pertanyaan dari attendees Pak. Ada 3, cuman saya ambil satu yang cukup menarik nih Pak. Dari Ibu Farah. Questionnya saya make it short. Jadi project PPP atau infrastruktur kan cenderung long project dengan 15 years span of the project dari completion sampai dengan mungkin nanti transfer atau BOT. Jadi sehingga dari sisi government sebagai PJPK itu nanti harus ada continue responsibility to monitor everything including payment dan completion itu sendiri. Nah, itu dari sisi kalau menurut view-nya Ibu Farah ada resiko reluctant dari regional legislative government Pak ya untuk initiate this project karena tadi ya situasi mungkin project yang panjang, consideration yang juga nilai project yang besar sehingga di sisi itu mungkin project-project yang di daerah menjadi sedikit tertunda. Nah, untuk memitigasi resiko itu sebenarnya yang sudah dilakukan atau akan dilakukan pemerintah, khususnya Bappenas apa Pak ya?
Ini sebetulnya ada dua hal, Pak Pri.
Ya.
Hal yang pertama itu terkait dengan kalau proyeknya itu menggunakan availability payment, ya berarti setiap tahun selama masa kontrak itu harus dianggarkan alokasi pembayaran availability payment. Ya. Tapi ini kan sudah ada Permendagri-nya. Jadi Permendagri 96 itu sudah ada, pengaturannya sudah ada. Jadi tidak membatasi KPBU di daerah yang menggunakan availability payment itu tidak dibatasi terkait dengan masa jabatan kepala daerah. Jadi itu sudah ada ini mitigasinya. Jadi kalau proyek yang KPBU daerah yang sudah ditawarkan, artinya apa? Sudah mendapat persetujuan dari Kementerian Dalam Negeri. Kemudian sudah mendapatkan persetujuan dari DPRD-nya. Ya. Kalau dua hal tersebut tidak ada, ya berarti badan usaha yang akan ikut bidding, mekanisme pengelolaan risikonya nggak bagus. Karena dia tidak bisa meyakinkan proyek ini bisa dikelola nggak. Nah, itu syarat suatu proyek masuk ke transaksi.
Oke.
Itu pertama. Kemudian yang kedua, sebenarnya yang ditulis di pertanyaan terkait dengan kelembagaan. Ini kontrak jangka panjang. Kalau di daerah itu ada nggak unit kerja yang akan mengelola KPBU kontrak tersebut? Nah, ini kami juga sudah mengatur di Perpres 38 dan di Permen 12 terkait dengan simpul KPBU. Simpul KPBU itu memang perlu ada di satu ini PJPK untuk nanti dia yang akan mengelola atau menjalankan kontrak kerjasama tersebut. Nah, itu memang harus ada di satu contracting agency. Bisa unit kerja tersendiri atau dibentuk ad hoc yang menangani proyek KPBU tersebut. Itu mungkin jawaban dari kami, Pak Pri.
Oke, ya terima kasih banyak Pak Sri Bagus atas waktunya dan presentasinya. Karena waktu yang juga terbatas, akhirnya ada beberapa pertanyaan yang ditujukan ke Bapak. Mohon izin kami tampung Pak, nanti kami coba circulate melalui email sehingga dapat Bapak respon secara terpisah. Terima kasih kembali Pak Sri Bagus atas waktunya dan atas presentasinya. Saya akan izin lanjutkan kepada pembicara selanjutnya Pak, dan saya just for make it short Pak Sri, saya akan coba simpulkan bahwa at least from Bappenas view with everything that the government has now to accelerate the project with all the incentive, the challenge is always there Pak. But as you said that now the challenge is not only for the government to solve the project, but also it will much rely on the consultant that involved in the project as well. And that's why we have for the next speaker, we have Pak Dongke Kavi. He is the legal practitioner and he will discuss the legal issues related to this Ppp project. And let me give the short bio of Pak Donke. He is of course, a legal practitioner in Indonesia. He is a CCLS alumni majoring in international economic law master. And he also had a master's degree in business from Aston University. And he obtained his first law degree from Trisakti University of Jakarta. He's the practitioner specializing in energy and infrastructure project, public procurement, project financing, and corporate commercial transaction, including M&A. He has numerous work experience, including working for UNDP, UNOPS, World Bank, and ADB. He also spent some years working at the Associated Office of Organ Lawyers in Jakarta, and currently works for BKM as lawyers in Jakarta. He also has been advising numerous clients, including government, developers, investor, and other private sectors. He is one of the team who draft Presidential Regulation number 38 of 2015 on PPP, and he has been advising numerous PPP project planning, preparation, and transaction. And now he will present the legal issues on this PPP project in Indonesia. And please, Pak Donke, to start your presentation.
Thank you very much, Dana. Well, good afternoon, everybody, and it's really glad to be here to present the legal issues of the implementation of the PPP projects in Indonesia. And as Dana said, I'm a proud alumni of CCLS. And well, I've been doing kind of PPP projects for years. And let me share with you guys about a number of fundamental issues in the PPP legalities. Please. Well, I would like to discuss the three issues at least, including general overview of regulatory and institutional framework of PPP projects, the fundamental aspects governed by the PPP regulatory frameworks, and the common legal challenges in the implementation of PPP in Indonesia. Next. Well, as commonly known that Indonesia is known by many as the country with the forest of regulations, where there are a lot of regulations wherein somehow can contradict each other. So in approaching a PPP, we have to understand the framework of regulation. So to make it short, a PPP project is governed by at least 4 regulatory clusters. First of all, we have to think about the sectoral regulation, and secondly, we have to think about the intersectoral regulations and the regional regulations, which are sometimes can be problematic and can be inconsistent with the national regulations. So these 3 regulations are the regulation that need to be considered on top of the PPP regulations as well. So these are the regulatory framework, and if we look at the deeper side, it's going to be very, very many. If you don't believe, next slide will show you how the regulatory, how the regulations look like. Next, please. So PPPs, there are at least 19 sectors in PPPs. So each project should firstly obey or follow the the sectoral regulation. For example, if it is the transport sector, then we have to follow a set of rules governing transport regulation. So secondly, we have the PPP regulation itself. As already mentioned, that PPP is mainly governed by Presidential Regulation 38 2015. And we have to also follow the implementing regulations of PPP. So there are a couple of regulations that we have to pay attention. Intersectoral regulations are the regulations that we have to pay attention. Many of the legal practitioners, do not really pay attention to about the intersectoral regulations, so that in the implementation, they find problems. So at least there are a number of important intersectoral regulations, including state finance, state treasury, national development planning system, investment, company law, land acquisition law, environmental law, and etc., etc. So which we really need to pay attention depending on the nature of the project itself. And as I said before, the regional regulation is the one that we need to pay attention as well, because regional regulation, especially in the form of PERDA or legislative regulation, is the one that really needs to be complied with. Next. Next, please. So another matter that you may need to pay attention is the stakeholders and who's doing what. And we may need to know who's going to be involved in a PPP project. So as you may see in this slide, we may see government contracting agency, or GCA, or in Bahasa Indonesia is better known as PJPK, Penanggung Jawab Proyek Kerjasama. So the GCA will enter into PPP agreement with special purpose vehicle, where it will borrow money from lenders and enter into guarantee agreement whenever it's required with IIGF, and IIGF will enter into regress agreement. And also the government contracting agency will have coordination lines with a number of ministries, like the generic ministries that will be involved in PPP, involve Ministry of Finance, Ministry of National Development Planning, National Land Agency, and ministry sectoral ministries, in which each of these ministries will have a different role. For example, Ministry of Finance will look after government guarantee and support and project development fund, and Ministry Development Planning, where Bagus resides, is to give sort of support in planning and assistance in preparation and transaction of a PPP project. A National Land Agency takes care of land acquisition, and sectoral ministries will take care of a kind of licensing and other form of support. Next, please. So in regulatory framework, there are at least 19 sectors where PPP can run. As you can see here, there are energy sectors, renewable energies, transport sectors, road, etc., etc., in which each sector has its own sectoral regulation to be complied with. Next, please. And then the regulatory framework governs the types of PPP projects. Well, as Pak Bagus already mentioned, there are two kinds of PPP projects, including solicited project and unsolicited project. Solicited project is projects that are prepared by the government, and unsolicited projects are the projects which are initiated by the private sector. So the private sectors are really encouraged to initiate the project to help finding out the potential projects that can be cooperated with the government. So unsolicited projects have a number of criteria, including technically integrated with the master plan of the sector concerned, economically and financially feasible, and the business entity that proposes the initiative has adequate financial capability to finance the implementation of the infrastructure provision. Next, please. So these are the steps. Well, I have to be very fast. Then I will share this presentation slide to you if you want to read further. These are the implementation stages of solicited project, and then the next, please, is the implementation stages of the unsolicited project. But one note is that, as Bagus mentioned earlier, also that the unsolicited project really has to go on tender process as well. Although it was initiated by the private sector, this has to be tendered as well. Next, please. So in selection of investors is the next provision that is governed by the regulatory framework, and here both solicited and unsolicited project should go through pre-qualification process, including which yield to public tender or direct appointment. Next, please. So this is one note of unsolicited project. This and solicited project, of course. Direct appointment is possible in PPP whenever there are two circumstances, where in special circumstances and a PPP, the pre-qualification only results to one qualified company. So, in practice, there are few examples of direct appointment, but I witnessed one project where the PQ only results one qualified company, which was then directly appointed. So I think it is really rather a little bit difficult to justify criteria in special circumstances, but the regulation allows these conditions to take place for direct appointment. Next, please. Land acquisition is another issue that is governed by the regulatory framework as well. So land acquisition shall be the responsibility of the government. And then through the PPP mechanism, like location determination for land acquisition shall be obtained before the signing of PPP contract. So besides being regulated, well, a PPP project, as per best practice, should obtain the land first before the project is launched to the public. So the land acquisition fund shall be the responsibility of the government. However, the private sector might finance the land acquisition, which will be paid back or compensated by the government at a later stage. Next, please. Government guarantee and supports are the two amongst the most important matters that will make a PPP project is lucrative and bankable. Well, people may may be mistaken between these two. Government guarantee, which means financial compensation given by Ministry of Finance through allocating risks for cooperation project. Well, as discussed earlier, one of the forms of the government guarantee is the one given by PTP or IIGF. While government supports mean fiscal contributions and or the other forms given by the minister, head of agency, head of regional government, or Minister of Finance in terms of increasing the feasibility of financial and effectiveness of PPP. So one of the forms of government support is VGF, Viability Gap Fund. So VGF already, the nature of VGF has been discussed previously. So these are the differences between the government guarantee and government support. Next, please. Well then, the common legal challenges in the implementation of PPP, well, I have noted a couple which we really need to work in, because when you guys practice law in PPP fields, you will discover a lot of legal issues. Well, these are the most notable ones that I can take notes. One of them is lack of capacity of the public sector actors who are unfamiliar with the PPP mechanism. Well, it's getting better really as moment, but if you look at like 5 or 10 years ago, no one knew what PPP is. So it's really our challenge, not only the government, but also the legal practitioners who should promote. Well, it will create the field of legal practitioners whenever the level of knowledge in PPP is the same, the industry will be created accordingly. So another thing is result in lack of interest to follow up on projects which have been designated as PPP, lack of coordination of key government stakeholders. Well, like or dislike, I have to admit this is one of the important challenges. Different perspective between government stakeholders, it happens. I have to be very honest. No offense, I'm really sorry for our government, but this is what happens. We have to work together. Limited resources available. Yes, we need people who understand PPP more. Well, these issues in lack of proper guidance from central government. Well, this is going to be our homework. Issues in land acquisition, issues of overlapping jurisdiction. Well, this is the apparent issues as well, where the resource or asset land belongs to a lower level authority, but the service crosses a jurisdictional border of those authorities. The higher level authorities, such as province, becomes responsible for the PPP. So, well, overlapping jurisdiction. Well, this really needs to be discussed by the respective stakeholders. Lack of capacity to monitor impact related to climate change, to PPP climate in service delivery standard. This is another issue, and then service delivery standard specification for certain PPP sectors. Next, please. Further challenges may involve failure of delay in obtaining necessary consents, in achieving planning approvals. This is what happens, what really happens, and every practitioner would agree with it. And consent and approvals for national government institution. Well, acceleration is needed here, and consent and approvals from the regional government if a project involves a regional government. So these are the challenges that we need to work on. Well, however, there are mitigation though. Next, please. Next, please. We need to overcome the barriers through support or technical assistance in project screening. This is somehow, well, Mauricio, what can I say? Sometimes, the project that is being sold, if I may say that, technically, financially are in question. So we may need to have carefully assessed the projects from the screening process. A training on drafting contractual agreement on PPP for the GCA. Well, this is the field of lawyers. Here we get together. This is one of the things we can assist the government and support technical assistance for drafting the specification of service delivery standard. Well, this is for lawyers and consultants as well, and support technical assistance to local banks to understand the risks associated with PPP project development. Well, many banks now need to understand the nature of PPP. Although kind of concession projects is not new here in Indonesia, but PPP is something new. There are some differences that they need to understand. So I think that's it from me. I hope I can take up some questions and an answer session. So I'll leave it to moderator to lead the Q&A session. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Pak Dongke. My apology because we are behind the schedule. Can I have your Q&A session moving to the end of the session of the next speaker? And for the next speaker, at least I have one question for your session, but I would like to move to the next speaker because of the time constraint of our next speaker.
Right.
Yeah, and for the next speaker, we now have Mr. Alex Wong from Hogan's Lovells Singapore office. Hi, good afternoon.
Hi, afternoon.
Yeah, Mr. Alex is the office managing partner in Singapore office, and he has the massive experience in energy infrastructure and construction matters, and he has a lot of project in terms of renewable energy sector, including water project and infrastructure related project. And without the prolong the presentation, please, Mr. Alec, you can start the presentation.
Thank you very much, Pak Adi, and good to be in the company of so many QM alumni. I must confess, I don't know if I was invited because I am actually also a Queen Mary alumni, not from the CCLS. I was actually a Queen Mary undergrad in law, and back in my day it was still called Queen Mary and Westfield College. So I think that shows how old I am. But thank you, Pak Adi, for the kind introduction. It's also great to see Pak Donka again, alumni of Hogan Levels. And I also listened with great intent to Pak Sri's presentation earlier on. So thank you very much for organizing this event. And I hope that PPPs in Indonesia will go from strength to strength as part of these discussions. I'm actually sharing this presentation with my colleague, Mohammed Kazmali, who are based in our Jakarta office. So I will speak the first half, first 15 minutes, and my colleague will speak the next 15 minutes. So I will look at the topic more from the perspective of the private partners and the lenders, whereas my colleague Kazmali will speak on it more from the perspective of the government contracting agencies. We can move forward with the presentation. My colleague Roland is helping to present, so hopefully the slides will come up soon. If we move to the next slide, please, Roland. Yeah, I only have 15 minutes, so I'm not going to, there's not a lot of coverage I can maintain, but having heard the presentations from Pak Donka and at least the tail end of Pak Sri's presentation, I think a lot of the basic issues have already been covered. So I won't go into all the basic issues in detail. And from what I hear, there's already a very strong understanding of PPPs, Indonesia, and how it works. But what I want to do in the next 10 or 15 minutes, my objective really is to take a step back and in spite of all the details we have on the helpful land legislation that helps with land acquisition, the IGF guarantee, the viability gap funding availability, I just want to take a step back and just look at how international investors and international lenders view PPPs when they go into jurisdictions like Indonesia, so that we give all the things that we've been discussing a little bit more perspective, especially from an international lender view. Obviously, not all PPPs in Indonesia will involve international lenders or international investors, but it's worth looking at it from that perspective. The first few slides are really just a look at, and I think the slides have just disappeared, Roland, so you might have to put that back on. If you go to the next slide. Yeah, again, I won't go into this in detail. I think we know what PPPs are about and how different it is from traditional procurement. So next slide, please, Roland. And this one is, I'll just dwell on this a little bit because this looks at the different forms of PPP that there are. At the bottom of that slide, you can see the traditional procurement models that we see. And as we go further up that stair, the more private sector involvement or the more private sector risk there will be. So you can see design, build, operate, which doesn't involve any financing on the private sector side. But the last three steps at the top of the ladder, they do involve financing. And the one at the top, where you really take demand risk, the private sector takes demand risk, is where the risk transfer in PPPs is the most obvious. So just setting out in an illustrative slide, what sort of different forms of PPPs there are. I know in Indonesia we've certainly seen availability payment type PPPs, and whether or not Indonesia will evolve into other form of PPPs will be what we will see with great interest in the coming years. Next slide, please. Yeah, Roland, next slide. Well, anyway, whilst Roland is waiting for the next slide to come up, the next slide really just shows a typical PPP type of structure. Is a PPP structure chart. And what that looks at is, what's important about, I guess, the structure chart that I want to demonstrate is the importance of finding the right structure, not just the right legal structure, but the right commercial structure in a PPP, and how you apply that commercial structure into a legal and regulatory framework for that particular country. In our instance, it will be for Indonesia. So it's important not just to get the risk transfer correct, but because PPPs adopt such a complicated or fairly complicated structure, it's important that that structure sits properly within the regulatory framework of the country we're looking at. If I was an international investor, or if I was an international lender, it would be very important for me to know and to understand that this complex framework that we're putting together, especially if it involves financing, is a framework that can work within the regulatory framework of that particular country. Can you move to the next slide, please, Roland? Okay, I don't know if Roland's able to move the slides, but I'm happy to speak to the topics that I have without the slides. So the last few points I want to talk about are to look in a little bit more detail at what exactly are the common legal issues. Yes, on this slide. What exactly are maybe just go one step back, Roland, so that I can just very quick summary on that previous slide since we didn't get to that. Yes, so this was the structure that I was talking about, a typical PPP structure that you would have. And as you can see, it has many elements, which is why it needs to properly sit within the regulatory framework of the country. And that means every element, not just the contract law of the project agreement or the concession agreement, but how is the security work for the lenders? How does the shareholder arrangements work for the investors? So all those need to sit properly within the regulatory framework. Next slide, please, Roland. So as I said, I was going to talk in a little bit more detail about some of the key issues that international lenders, international investors would look at. I've talked about some of these briefly, but let me go into a little bit more detail and maybe talk a little bit more, speak a little bit more about examples. The commercial structure of the underlying project, I remember having had a lot of dealings with, I don't know if any of you know, Michael Barrow, who's one of the directors of the private sector side of the Asian Development Bank. And whenever I speak to him about PPPs, he always tells me the first thing that bankers like him looks at is whether the project passes the sniff test. The sniff test is whether it smells right. And usually if the bankers or investors look at a project, they effectively look at a very high level, a basic outline of who is the government contracting agency, what are they actually buying from the PPP service perspective, how much can they afford, how much can they pay, and is the structure too complex and too difficult to implement. So that is actually just from an international investor perspective, a very important hurdle to pass. So it's very important when we're structuring PPPs that we take that step back and we look at the overall structure and we put in place something that that passes that sniff test, that tells people, yes, this is something that looks like it will work within the context of the commercial structure of the project, but also something that will work within the regulatory framework and the country that we're looking at. The legal aspects, the legality of the underlying structure, I've talked about in terms of how it sits within the regulatory framework, so I won't talk so much about that. The identities of the key public sector contracting parties is important. I think just now Pak Dongka talked about, government contracting agencies. Are they the right ones to implement the project? Are they the right ones to procure the project? Are they the right ones to contract with the private sector on the project? So this is something that is very important and something that sometimes in more inexperienced PPP countries, I don't count Indonesia as inexperienced because having seen how Indonesia has developed its PPP framework, if you compare it to a country like Vietnam, I think Indonesia is much more advanced in looking at these issues. But the identity of the public sector contracting parties, not just the government contracting agency, but how the IIGF and how the Ministry of Finance plays into that structure is very important. So it's good that Indonesia has taken the time to look at that and to create a framework that works. And it's not just a framework that works academically, because we've seen the IIGF structure work in a number of PPP projects in Indonesia with international investors. I think the Central Java power project is the most obvious one, but there are other examples as well. And we talked earlier on about the importance of the regulatory framework as a whole. So what do I mean by the importance of the regulatory framework helping to support the PPPs? I've already mentioned the importance, the predictability of the regulatory framework to support a complex PPP structure. It's interesting, Pak Dongka earlier on talked about Indonesia as being the forest of regulations. And I know Indonesia was well known for a number of different regulations. And I think the important thing for investors with respect to regulations, especially in Indonesia, is we all know sometimes the Indonesian regulatory framework will have sometimes contradictory laws or laws that cut across each other. And we need to make sure that the PPP for that particular sector, that any such laws can be addressed or dealt with, whether in the contract or in some other way. The specific regulatory issues like how the IIGF provides a support, how the VGF works, I think Pak Dongka's already covered quite well in his earlier presentation, so I won't go into any more detail on that. What's very important, and I want to take the last 2 points together because they talk about how the lender's security package will work and how the lenders might be able to enforce on their security in a situation where something goes wrong. And that's something that is sometimes overlooked, because when government contracting agencies, they put their project together, they focus very much on the commercial aspect of the project. They focus very much on the contract, the PPP contract. And if they don't look closely enough at, is this something that the lenders can take security over? Is the direct agreement going to work in this context? If that's not looked at carefully, it may create issues with whether the lenders can support the project when it comes to financing. So that's very important as well. Dispute resolution is part of the ability of the lenders to enforce. And I don't know if I missed any of the earlier sessions, whether it was discussed, but in a number of less developed PPP jurisdictions, a lot of investors are still looking at neutral dispute resolution. So in Vietnam, lenders might say, I want dispute resolution in Singapore rather than in Vietnam. I think Indonesia is a lot more mature than Vietnam, as I mentioned previously. So it'll be interesting to hear the views of others. Maybe Kasmali can contribute to this later on whether international investors are comfortable with Barney arbitration or dispute resolution in Indonesia when it comes to PPP projects in Indonesia now. When in less developed times, maybe that would have been more difficult, but maybe nowadays with Indonesia being a lot more developed, that has become a bit easier. So that's all I wanted to say in terms of the international investor and the lender view. It's possible I might have to sign off for another meeting later, so I apologize if I'm not around to answer questions. But let me hand over to Kasmali now. If anyone has any questions, Pak Adi, please feel free to share my contacts with the participants. I'm more than happy to take questions over email, over a call later. So Kasmali, maybe I hand over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Alex, for the presentation. It's all pleasure to having you for this station, and for sure we will send all the questions that we have and give it to you for your response. And thank you very much. Now, for the next session, we have Smiley. You also partners in Hogan Lovells, the Jakarta office, and he has an experience, a massive experience as well in terms of project and energy sector. And for this presentation, he will present more on the view of lenders' appetite in the project of in project finance. And please, Pak Kasmali, to start the presentation.
Oke, terima kasih, Mas Pri. Apa kabar?
Baik, Mas.
Okay, thank you. Well, I guess the benefit of being the last speaker is the previous speakers have addressed your presentation material. So, any questions? So yeah, my slide is more to general practice of a project financing rather than specific in a PPP project, because Pak Donke and Alex, as well as Pak Sri Bagus, already addressed specific matters with respect to the financiers or lenders' perspective in providing finance in a PPP project. Next slide, please, Roland. The impact, as we all know, currently we are having a global COVID-19 pandemic. The pandemic has changed not only the way of our living, but it also impacted our national budget, new supply chains, and as well as liquidity aspects. In terms of the national projects, Indonesia government has shifted the budget to be more focused on the handling of COVID-19 pandemic and social welfare impacts. For this purpose, the President of the Republic of Indonesia, Pak Jokowi, has issued Regulation number 54 of 2020 with respect to state budget and expenditure, and the implementation of regulation was further issued by the Minister of Home Affairs, number 119 of 2020, regarding the acceleration of 2020 regional budget adjustment in context of handling COVID-19 virus pandemic. As per the joint regulation, the local governments has rescheduled the infrastructure development, which is funded by the government. For example, the development infrastructure, road, bridges, and railway and other infrastructure construction. The other important factor in project development is sustainability of supply chains. During the COVID-19 pandemic, the supply chain has been interrupted as workforce limited, prohibited, and they have kind of limitation to carry out or to implement the export or import restriction. These conditions leading to a series of delays and push the business to find the new supply chain source. Responding to the pandemic, the government, consequently, the government has suffered delays, loss of efficiency, and higher cost impacts because of COVID-19 pandemic. And with that situation, the mitigation has been taken by the government is with respect to the regulatory point of view. The government issued the government regulation number 23, and then government regulation number 23 is with respect to the National Economic Recovery Program, which include national investment to selected state-owned enterprise, placement of funds, and then selected commercial banks. Even though the Financial Authority, OJK, is not directly handling the COVID-19 pandemic, but to react to that situation, the OJK also issued regulation with respect to consolidation of commercial banks. Then the regulation requires for a commercial banks to have a minimum of capital in the amount of 1 trillion. Next, please. So what is project financing? The concept of a project financing is for a lender to agree to make a long-term finance based on expected cash flow from the operation of the project. The lenders do not primarily look the credit worthiness of the sponsors. In the Ppp Project, sponsors mean the private sector. The lenders also closely review the merits of the project itself. As Alex mentioned, that the most important thing for a financier or lender before they provide fund is to find out, to understand how is the structure of the Ppp project. The key principle for the lenders to overview the merits of the project is how the cash flow be available in all circumstances. Because if you are talking about Ppp, we're not talking about 10 to 15 years, but it's longer than that before the project is turned over to the government contracting agency or PJPK. And with that, of course, the lenders will require due diligence with respect to the technicality of the project, environmental and social. And on top of that, the lenders, of course, the lender expect kind of certainty from the political point of view. For example, if the government contracting agency is regional government, what if in the next 5 years the governor has changed, the Bupati has changed? So the sustainability of the project, of the political situation is also one of the consideration of the lenders. And then, of course, complex and detailed documentation will be incorporated in the contractual arrangement between the sponsor and the financier will be properly set up. Next, please. So on this slide, you can see the advantages and pros and cons with respect to project financing. You know, mobilizes private sector, then disadvantage of high degree of complexity, and then voluminous of documentation. That's the downside of the project financing. We're not dealing with, as a lawyer, we're not dealing with a simple documents. It's going to be a huge amount of documents to be prepared and negotiated between the parties. Next slide, please. So since we have until 5 o'clock, even though I saw in the chat that Pak Dongke would allow more than 5 p.m., I'm trying to expedite my slide. The lenders' appetite in project finance, the lenders have fixed expected returns, of course. And then the lender would like to see a very, very minimum risk. Main concern is debt service through certain stable and predictable project revenue streams. That's the main concern of the lenders as the financier. And then we'll seek to limit or eliminate any threat or risk to the project company and or any interruption of the project revenue stream. In a PPP project, you know, as explained by Pak Sri Bagus and Pak Dongke, you know, IIGF will have very important roles in a PPP project because IIGF will provide guarantee to a PPP project. And then control and monitoring rights will be built into the finance documentation. So this one is more dealing with, you know, maybe more with lawyers because we need to prepare documentation with respect to the financing. And then full security package, unlike a very common financing project financing, in a PPP project, unlike the common financing whereby lenders may require the borrower to provide security, for example, land, but it is quite unlikely in a PPP project because, as I said earlier, IIGF will provide guarantee for a PPP project, and for example, the loan, the land is not owned by project company, unlike in a project in a common project financing scheme. Next slide, please. If you are talking about lenders' appetite, different lenders have different risks and appetite, and they have also different requirements. With respect to domestic lenders, they may have different approach as to how they are assessing the project. And during COVID-19 pandemic, a number of lenders applied more stringent approach, especially with respect to the delay of the project. And then with respect to the cash flow, the lenders would like to control the cash flow of the project. This is in order to maintain to secure the repayment of the loan. And this will be, with respect to security, this will be done by key consideration from Indonesian lenders' perspective. Typical and common security package would include mortgage, pledge, fiducia, but again, in a PPP project, this would be unlikely happen. And then bankability, as Alex mentioned as well, we have to see from the end user's point of view. If we are talking about development of infrastructure in renewable energy, the end user will be PLN as the buyer of the power. And then if we are talking about toll road, of course, the end user is the people to use the toll road. And what the government should anticipate is in development of infrastructure, the government should build infrastructure. This is with respect to the market review in the early stage of PPP project, whereby the contracting government agency will prepare the business outline case and then final outline case. The government should develop a infrastructure based on demand instead of based on supply. So we have to expect the government will carry out the study so that the development of infrastructure is not based on supply side. So it's based on demand side, so that the project will be bankable. Next, please. I guess this will be my last slide. This is kind of flow with respect to the preparation of PPP that has been addressed by Pak Sri Bagus and Pak Dongka as well. The first is the proper project selection. We have to consider that not all PPP projects have an attractive profile to be offered. That's why the government contracting agency need to carry out a market survey, and then if there is no response from the sponsor, and it means that the infrastructure development is not interesting one. And then also with respect to, I'm jump to the almost the end of the flow here. The sufficient knowledge of government contracting agency, this has been addressed by Pak Dongka as well, that we need to educate our friends at the relevant government agency, including technical ministry, with respect to PPP. And then to evaluate a successful PPP project, we need to understand that a PPP project should also meet objectives and anticipation of most stakeholders, including the end users, as I mentioned earlier. Different stakeholders will recognize project success from different angles, in line with their, of course, their benefits, their interests. The key stakeholders in a PPP project are composed of three components. The first one is the public partner, the government contracting agency, and second one is private partner, the sponsors, including the financier and the end user. In a PPP project, the life cycle is not short, so is longer than the general construction project. In general, the concession period of a PPP project is more than 20 years before the project will be handed over back to the government. And then for judging a success of PPP project, long-term characteristic of the PPP project have to be considered in the PPP as the success indicator of a project. I think that's it from me, Mas Pri. Matur nuwun.
Yeah, thank you, Pak Kasmali, for the presentation. Now we have the Q&A session, and as I informed earlier that this Q&A session will also involve Pak Dongka as the previous speaker to respond on the question that we have so far. And for I think this question can go both to both speakers, and the question is for some project. So Pak Dongka will answer from the legal view, and Pak Kasmali will answer from the lender's perspective. The question is for some project, for instance, toll and railways, there's maybe some duplication in terms of projection, in terms of the attraction of the projection itself. For example, it may have conflicting projection in terms of passengers for the railways and the cars for the toll roads. And in that sense, both project may be considered as the priority for the governments and needs to be a boost for the next stage. And in that sense, can you give the response from the legal and from lender's perspective as this quote unquote seems conflicted project, and both are the priority for the government now? Please, Pak Dongka first.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Well, I think this issue is more than project development issue rather than more on the legal issues. But the thing is, what makes it legal issue is that there is no such legal ground that gives sort of guarantee for demand. That kind of issue is strongly related to demand, where demands for toll roads and demands for the passengers in railways can decrease unexpectedly. So that's one of the issues we are facing as the Ppp practitioners. There is no such legal there's no such legal ground that guarantees demand at this moment. Well, IIGF well, so far they have lists of sort of risks that can be covered, but so as far as I know, that there is no coverage for demand guarantee. So we may need to rely on the prediction, and it turns out that the risk mitigation should be between the private sector and the government contracting agency. So I think so. That's one of the challenges. Or another mitigation is that the in international investment law, we recognize some credit agency overseas or outside Indonesia jurisdiction. There are some credit export agencies offered by like a UK or MIGA or wherever from Canada, China. They may offer the demand risk guarantee. So whenever, if they can get it, then I think that's one of the things that that can attract lender or to make the bank to make a project is bankable. I think that's my observation of this question. Maybe Pak Kasmali can add up and maybe correct me if I have a false observation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Pak. Please, Pak Kasmali, to also add the answer.
So yeah, first, I'm not a banker, so my advocate license number is blah 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 blah. So to address questions on demand, as a lawyer, as explained by Pak Dongke, we need to look back to look at the agreements between the parties. The most important thing before we talk about demand is how the railway is developed. So from the lender's perspective, as discussed earlier, we need to understand how is the scheme of the structure of the Ppp project, and then who is the sponsor, and who is doing the EPC contract. Because if the EPC contract is carried out by perusahaan kaleng-kaleng, the lenders will not be interested in that project because the durability of the project will be less than 30 years. The quality of the EPC is not there, is not as expected. Again, as I'm echoing Pak Dongke, we cannot guarantee a demand. But if something happens, no one predicts that COVID-19 pandemic happens globally. And if that happens, we need to look at the agreement. and what is the guarantee. So in this PPP project, even though the government will provide viability cap, the fund cap. So, but it will be the last resource before the fund is transferred to the project company, and then give it to lenders to satisfy the repayment requirement. I think that is not an issue. We should look at the agreement with this project. PPP project is more secure. But we need to also understand that we call it as Indonesian Investment Authority. So we have BUMN Karya, we have PIP, we have Ppp Project, conducting government agencies, also involving the government as well. And then we have INA, Indonesian Investment Authority, or Lembaga Pengelolaan Investasi, recently established by the government. Unlike PPP, Indonesian Investment Authority will rely on equity instead of loan to develop infrastructure project. So I hope that answers your question, Mas Pri.
Yeah, thank you, Pak. Very responsive. And we have another question. Actually, this question went to Pak Sri Bagus, but please allow me to ask this question to you both as lawyers. And the question in bahasa, pertanyaannya, kontrak PPP dengan government, apakah bisa dikatakan sebagai kontrak yang tidak pure private, tapi salah satu pihaknya dikonsider sebagai pejabat tun karena mewakili pemerintah, sehingga if there is a case bisa dibawakan ke pengadilan tun. Mungkin Pak Kasmali bisa dijawab terlebih dahulu.
Saya nanti Pak Dongke bisa menambahkan juga. Ini jawabnya bahasa Indonesia juga ya.
Ya.
Banyak ilustrasi kontrak yang seperti ini, bukan hanya PPP ya, tapi juga di bidang pertambangan juga. Kita lihat kontrak karya dahulu sebelum adanya Undang-Undang Minerba Nomor 4 Tahun 2009. Pihak dari kontrak karya itu juga antara pemerintah dengan perusahaan kontrak karya. Tapi apabila ada dispute, di mana diselesaikan? Sama di sini juga, PPP Agreement mengatur settlement of dispute. Venue-nya di mana? Apakah itu bisa dibawa ke PT-UN? Bisa. Tapi apakah nanti akan diproses? Nanti dulu gitu kan. Pasti akan, nanti kalau saya jadi pihak pemerintah, saya akan bilang, look, saya akan mengajukan eksepsi atas kompetensi karena ini kan seharusnya diselesaikan melalui venue dispute yang diatur berdasarkan kontrak di PPP-nya. Sama dengan kontrak karya juga, di mana diselesaikan di unsitral, arbitrase. Itu dari saya, Mas Bli. Pak Dongke silakan mungkin mau tambahin.
Ya, silakan Pak. Terima kasih Pak Kasmali. Pak Dongke.
I agree gitu ya. I agree with Pak Kasmali. Terus apa namanya? Ya cuma saya share aja ya so far ya apa dalam in drafting PPP contracts. I've never seen that there is such a clause stating that such dispute will be brought to Petun. No such clause at all in contract. But as Pak Kasmali said, apakah bisa dibawa ke Tun, gitu ya? Oh bisa, gitu. Bagaimana bisa? Nah, lalu pertanyaannya adalah objek dari Tun itu apa sih sebetulnya? Sekarang kita lihat kalau memang objek dari Tunnya itu terbukti adalah apa namanya? Keputusan apa namanya keputusan
pejabat
dari
atau negara
melanggar gitu ya sudah barang tentu itu akan dibawa ke jadi ya jawabannya selalu ada hole, selalu ada loophole gitu ya, tetapi bukan kontraknya itu sendiri yang ini, tapi memang keputusan pejabat publik yang ini apa namanya melanggar apa yang berdampak kepada kontrak. saya lagi itu pernah justru yang jadi isu itu di dalam PPP ini, PPP kan masih sangat-sangat embrio gitu ya. Jadi belum banyak nih, nanti mungkin dalam 10 tahun ke depan ketika PPP udah pada signing nih, makanan lawyers gitu kan, litigation lawyers gitu kan, arbitrations. Nah sekarang ini adalah permasalahannya, isunya ini PPP kontrak ini masanya di bidding, banyak bidding PPP yang dibatalkan. Contoh waktu itu di Bandung 10 tahun yang lalu gitu ya, ini sudah mau tanda tangan gitu, terus wali kotanya lagi itu dicomot sama 3 huruf itu yang di Kuningan, terus ininya dibatalkan semua proyeknya, dan itu karena proyeknya itu initiated by private sectors, lalu siapa yang akan menanggung gitu, siapa yang akan menanggung kerugian dari private sectors? Apakah private sectors bisa ketun gitu? Objeknya adalah bahwa lagi itu Pak Ridwan Kamil ya waktu itu yang itu barunya. Nah ini karena saya buka karena ini udah di berita-berita udah banyak gitu ya, di berita udah banyak. This is not confidential. Dia pintar juga, dia tidak melakukan apapun, jadi tidak melakukan membuat suatu surat, membuat ini, membuat itu. Jadi proyek itu tidak bisa dibawa ke TUN. Jadi kita lihat juga proyek cost-nya gitu ya. Apakah memang bisa dibawa ke TUN? Ya kalau kita waktu itu di Queen Mary diajarin, as a lawyer you should not say yes or no. You should say it depends gitu ya. Jadi ini terjadi. It depends on whether or not ini adalah merupakan keputusan publik gitu ya, yang berdampak dan merugikan para pihak. Gitu dari saya itu. Mungkin ada tambahan lagi. Well, this is already free time. If Pak Kasmali have time, please feel free, Pak. We can discuss about legal issues. It's getting interesting, I guess.
Oke, terima kasih Pak Dongke. Kita so far there is no more questions, so I guess that this is the end of the session, and thank you for all the speakers and attendees for attending this seminar, and also the organizer, CCLS Queen Mary University of London. And as a moderator, I will give to Mbak Aisyah to conclude and close the webinar. Please, Mbak.
Thank you, Mr. Dana, for being the moderator, and also thank you for Pak Kasmali and Pak Dongke and Pak Sri Bagus, also the other speakers for your time and also for the knowledge that has been shared to us. It is very insightful, and I feel like myself being the speaker for the next 10 years. I think the knowledge that I get in Queen Mary will be very useful for my career later on. So I also want to say thank you for the participants that have attended this event since the beginning. It's almost 3 hours until now. And we hope to see you all again in the next event. Thank you.